Hi, everybody. It's Simon from Hive Accountancy here. I'm joined today by Cam McKellar from Hugh James Solicitors. Hi, Cam.
Hi, Simon.
Thanks for joining us today. We've got a bit in common with each other in that we both do a bit of work for dentists. You know, Hive primarily focus on dentistry, and I know you do a lot in your healthcare department as well. And actually, one of the things we've discovered through conversation that we both do a lot of is incorporation of dentists. Now, anyone who watches our mailing list will know that I strongly believe a lot of people should look very closely at incorporating. There's a lot of tax benefits for dentists to incorporate. You've obviously raised in conversations we've had that there's a lot of legal implications as well for particularly practice owners looking to incorporate. So thank you for your time today to discuss and kind of raise some of the key points that people may need to think about. Cool. So can you tell me a little bit about who Hugh James are?
Yeah, so Hugh James are a full service law firm. We're a top 100 law firm based in Cardiff, but we do have offices in Southampton, Plymouth, Manchester, and London. So we cover across the country, in particular, sort of Welsh matters being based in Cardiff, but also
Yeah.
up and down the country, and also sort of multi-jurisdictional matters too. So we can offer all services and really can provide a sort of dedicated healthcare team for our clients.
Great. So you're primarily within the healthcare sector. Is that kind of that's slightly wider than dentists, but I guess you do a lot of dental transactions, which our clients will be of most interest to.
That's it, yeah. So we have a healthcare team within the sort of wider corporate commercial team. So due to my background with healthcare transactions and particularly
Hmm.
dentists, as you noted, that's where I fit in really. But as you say, we offer a full healthcare service with regards to sort of care homes, pharmacists, dentists. So we're well equipped with regards to regulatory and legal issues that are particular to those sectors.
Where would you start? You know, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you're introduced to a client who is thinking about incorporating? Maybe we've already confirmed they would save tax, and it seems like a good idea to do. Where would you take things from there?
Yeah, I mean, we'd obviously make it clear that the essence of incorporation is having an existing sole trader or partnership business, and then deciding to trade the existing practice through a limited company. Now, there's pros and cons of using a limited company from a legal point of view, which we can address in a moment. But obviously, the essence of is transferring the ongoing business, successful practice into that of a company's wrapper. And
Hmm.
so that from completion of the incorporation, the limited company is now the practice owner. Patients may not realise on a day-to-day basis, but obviously from a legal and tax point of view, the changes can be quite significant. So forming a limited company has advantages in the sense that it's a very commonly used structure. There's
Hmm.
lots of guidance as to how to adhere to the Companies Act, which is the statutory regime that looks after companies in England and Wales. Importantly, it's always important to remember that the company will then own the assets and not the individual, which is why I mentioned earlier about having a transfer of those
Yeah.
assets.
I have a
It,
very crude analogy I use in that a limited company I often describe as being a carrier bag, and in that carrier bag you pop your assets, your dental business, your cash, your patient list, things like that, and you no longer own those assets. You own the bag which owns those assets.
yeah, and absolutely, and that in a sense makes a disposal easier as well. If you're looking that far down the line, is that a
Hmm.
purchaser can come buy the limited company, buy the shares to the limited company, i.e., taking the carrier bag and everything that was in that carrier bag. On that topic, obviously the company is a separate legal identity, and therefore debt finance is raised by the company's name. So any loans entered into to finance the practice will be entered into by the company rather than the individual principal. So that's a very big departure. And importantly, with a limited company, as the name suggests, liability is limited. So in very rare circumstances, can that corporate veil be pierced and the directors and shareholders be found liable. So that's very attractive to business owners generally, but also dental practice owners too.
Yeah, can you maybe just cover what that means? Because we say to clients, you're I guess from a non-legal perspective, I would say that kind of means as an individual, you're only risking the capital you give to that company, whether it's lending it money in the first place, but then that can sometimes be expanded a bit by giving personal guarantees and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to note that the Companies Act sets out statutory duties on directors. So there are certain things that a director of a limited company, regardless of its trade, should be doing, and the duties it owes to that company and the shareholders. So it's not completely without risk, but there's enough guidance and there's enough sort of mechanism in place to make sure that those are fairly easy to adhere to. You're right. Aside from that, it's sort of the capital that you put in that's at risk, and sort of rather than any personal assets,
Yeah,
unless, as you know, a bank requires a personal guarantee. Now that's quite common, and would be particularly common in the case of an incorporation, because in all likelihood it would be a new company without a trading history, and
yeah,
so the bank or funder would look at the principal dentist as the success, and want a guarantee from them to ensure that the company whose name the debt will be in will continue to repay that. And if the company should fail to repay that, then there's a personal guarantee with the principal to fall back on in terms of the lender. As to sort of the financial strength of the company and the assets will determine how easy it is to negotiate not having a personal guarantee or having perhaps a reduced one. And again, it's something that can be reviewed over time. So if it's an initial requirement, it may reduce as time goes on due to the success and growth of the company. We can look at the sort of the nuts and bolts that need to be considered on the basis that it's now been decided from a tax and legal point of view that incorporation is the right way to go.
yeah, okay.
It's important to note perhaps a niche part of law, but an important one all the same, is the Dentists Act 1984, aptly named. But this applies, Section 43 applies to directors of incorporated bodies carrying out dentistry. And it's a requirement that the majority of directors are persons that are either registered dentists or registered dental care professionals.
Yeah.
So it's important to ensure that you're right, the right side of the statutory regime in that respect. It has been determined, despite the sort of the vague wording, that a 50-50 split is appropriate.
Yeah,
So
I know
if
the language
one,
they use is very kind of double negative, isn't it? It's not more than 50% cannot be non-members or something like that. But the end result is, as long as it's at least 50-50 in favor of, or in favor of is not the right word, but 50% dentists,
yeah,
then generally okay. And is that shareholders or directors or both?
that's directors.
Directors, okay.
Yeah. So in the sort of the vast number of incorporations, we don't anticipate that to be a problem, considering the nature of the incorporation from day one. But it's obviously just something to be wary of from day one, but also if there's any further investment.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, I think sort of that's all the background to incorporation. It's been decided that the legal and the tax signs are pointing to incorporation. What next? And I suppose this is where we really come into it from a legal point of view, is that there needs to be a transfer agreement. So there needs to be an arm's length sale and purchase agreement, as though you would have if you were buying from a third party. But obviously it's between the principal dentist and the new limited company. Principal dentist selling the assets. So that includes all of the equipment, all of the goodwill, over to the new company as the purchaser. Now, obviously, it's that's not going to be heavily negotiated as it would be in a third party transaction, but certain key aspects to that agreement really need to be in there to make it a sort of an arm's length transaction, certainly from a tax point of view, as I'm sure you've
Yeah,
seen
I
before.
was going to say this is certainly where some of the tax decisions that we may have already made get kind of implemented and solidified. So does the practice has to transfer to the business at arm's length, as you say, but is that paid for? Is that left as a loan? Is that kind of gifted with various gift relief claims made? There's a number of tax outcomes that
Yeah,
actually
and
the contract makes happen, basically.
yeah, that's it. And it's, you know, the contract is the line in the sand,
Hmm.
to say beyond doubt, you know, when those assets were transferred from a tax point of view, as you noted, but also from a legal point of view, with regards to liability, and other matters that we'll go on to. So it's really underpinning the whole incorporation. There shouldn't be any doubt as to when that incorporation happened.
Hmm.
Um, did some of it happen before other aspects of it? You know, it needs to really be done all at the same time, and that's the record of it.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing, because I kind of watch and help a lot of clients incorporate over the years, and one thing that always becomes a point for discussion is, when is the completion date going to be? How do we line up the business transfer agreement that you've just been talking about? How do we make sure the banks and card machines are online? How do we make sure the loan is refinanced on the right day? How do we make sure the property and the lease is all starting all on the same day? And it is, it wouldn't be kind of underselling it to say it's as complex as it is when handing the keys to a completely new owner, because that is kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
How do you kind of coordinate that all those things happen together? And are there any other bits I'm overlooking? Maybe perhaps the NHS has to be, and certainly the CQC, they all have to be ready for the same date. So not
Yeah,
always an easy task.
absolutely, and the ducks need to be in a row. With regards to the um, the new company, it's a new entity in terms of the Health and Social Care Act. So a registration needs to be made with CQC for that entity to carry out dentistry. So submissions will need to be made to CQC to cancel the existing registration, new registration to be lined up with regards to a nominated individual and registered manager too. So the CQC need to be comfortable with that happening. Importantly, also, if there's an NHS contract, the NHS need to be made aware too. Now, I say made aware, it's a process all in itself. You know, there's no
Yeah.
right under a GDS contract just to assign it to the company between you. There's a whole incorporation process in the sort of NHS and dental policy book, and it's integral to follow that. There's a lot of information, and the devil is really in the detail of the application for that form. There's no sort of legal obligation on NHS England to grant a new contract, or rather a novation of the existing contract over to the new company. And sort of in the worst case scenario, there are rules that suggest that perhaps NHS England should look to offer that contract to other providers who may be able to provide a more competitive UDA rate, or more competitive terms, sort of on a procurement tender. You know, and that can have grave consequences. It's not just a case of thinking you own that contract and you can do whatever you want with it, including incorporating it into a limited company. So sort of early discussions with NHS England really just to assess the likely terms of incorporation,
Yeah.
even before submitting the formal application, whereby you'd have to sort of set out how the company is going to continue to perform that contract in the same way that you have been.
And this is one of the first questions we would normally get clients to ask. Ask your bank, ask the NHS, and the range of responses is from kind of nothing to possibly, but we're too busy to even think about it, through to no, and anything in between, basically, and often not actually a yes. So we have to look at what other options there are for the practice. A straightforward yes is often not forthcoming, but that isn't necessarily the end of the road. Is certainly not for kind of contracts within NHS England. There's other ways of maybe just moving private components company or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is possible to do sort of a hybrid incorporation. Sort of, as we were talking about at the start of this call, it's not a case of having a straightforward incorporation, but obviously having everything lined up, having NHS and private side of the business all going over to the company is probably the most straightforward version of the incorporation. But as you say, there are ways to structure a hybrid situation too. But then consideration also needs to be given to the CQC regulating not just the new company now, but also the original principal or contractor of the GDS contract too.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, I don't think we'll need to cover kind of too much more right now. But what would be your kind of parting thought, as it were? You know, is there one thing that everyone should bear in mind if they've been working with an accountant who has said, look, you are going to save tax by incorporating. Let's go and get some lawyers involved and make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essentially the takeaway here is that you do need legal and tax advisors. There's probably more tax advantages than strictly legal advantages to the business, and that will be the real driver.
Yeah.
So the lawyers will have to work carefully with the accountants who are advising that and driving that, as you said earlier, about how that purchase price may be dealt with, and sort of the value of the equipment and the goodwill. But it's really just to line those ducks up. So you have to consider what will happen for property. You have to sort of engage with the CQC process early. We all know of the delays of the CQC. It's not an instant process. Again, conversations with NHS England.
Not an instant process.
No, and you know, it's submitting the forms and then it's doing it correctly, and making sure that goes smoothly. But also, as you noted earlier in our call, talking to the banks. You know, it's likely that the principal has existing finance with the bank that will need to be refinanced into the name of the company, and then it's a requirement of the bank and the bank solicitors, in all likelihood, to make sure the bank are comfortable with that, and any new security that will be put in place. So the whole process needs to be sort of carefully managed and lined up so that all of that can happen on the same day, and the next day the company can trade and operate as a dental practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, it might be the tax advice that kind of causes the is the catalyst for the incorporation starting. But it's the lawyers, it's people like yourself and your colleagues at Hugh James that make it happen, basically. And you need both.
Well, this is it, and even sort of within Hugh James, you know, I'm in the corporate commercial team. I deal with the nuts and bolts of the businesses in the healthcare sector. We obviously also have a property team who deal with specialize in commercial property. You would hope, in most cases, the property aspect of this would be quite straightforward. If the principal owns the freehold, then that can be disposed of or transferred to the new company, or it may be that the tax advice suggests that should go into a property company. But then we have to think about leases and essentially ensuring that the new company has permission to be on the property. And complications can arise where there's a third-party landlord. So again, it's making sure there's early discussions to make sure that the third-party landlord's on board with the company occupying the premises. And all of this, as such as the tax advantages, as you would have explained, it all tidies things up if and when there's a potential sale in the future. There's nothing worse than sort of coming across a practice that we're assisting due diligence on and trying to piece together an incorporation that was either done badly or some of it was done, but it's not quite sure when it happened, what went over, and that's all important from a legal point of view to make sure that the right entity is selling the right assets. It's perfectly plausible for for the principal to be a seller and also the limited company to be a seller, but it needs to be the right way around,
Yeah.
from a legal and tax point of view, as I'm sure you've seen.
And yeah, I was going to say that the tax outcomes of whether whether your buyer is putting their hand in the bag and grabbing the assets out of there, or whether they're taking the bag off your hands, is completely different tax outcomes. And to the benefit of the seller, I believe you have flexibility to sell properly and almost choose your tax to a certain extent at the point of exit.
Mhm.
That's all been incredibly helpful. I think I'd probably sum that up as kind of just a bit of evidence that incorporation is more than just changing where you bank your income, and it has to be
Yeah.
done properly, or it kind of doesn't count. Thanks very much for your time today, Cam. It's actually been really informative to cover off some of the key legal components of incorporation. If anyone has any questions, how could they get in touch?
Yeah, so I'll provide you with my details, but my email address is Campbell, which is CAMPBELL.McKellar, MCKELLAR at hughjames.com. Obviously, I can provide you with my contact number as well, but I'm more than happy to discuss with you on initially, Simon. If there's someone that just needed some advice initially, more than happy to discuss that with you, and then obviously sort of have introductions from there on.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Cam. It's been really good, as I said. So yeah, thank you all for watching.
Thank you.